Picture this. Berlin, November 1989. The wall falls. Champagne flows in the streets. CNN broadcasts jubilation across Europe. And in Yugoslavia, workers in giant factories watch the news with cautious optimism. They think capitalism means opportunity. They think freedom means prosperity. They don't realize they're about to witness the greatest theft in modern European history. This isn't a story about ethnic war. This is a story about a balance sheet massacre. The Balkans didn't collapse because of bullets. They collapsed because of something far more devastating: financial predation, industrial cannibalism, and a privatization scheme so brutal it would make robber barons blush. Welcome to the economic crime scene that never stops bleeding. In 1989, Yugoslavia wasn't perfect, but it was producing. Factories hummed in Bosnia. Shipyards operated in Croatia. Automotive plants assembled vehicles in Serbia. Workers had jobs, health care, housing. The system was flawed, bureaucratic, inefficient. But it was functional. It fed families. It built bridges. It exported goods across continents. Then came the promise of the free market. Consultants arrived from the West with briefcases and PowerPoint presentations. They spoke of efficiency, competition, growth. They promised that selling state assets would unleash prosperity. What they delivered instead was a masterclass in legalized looting. Here's what they never told you about post-communist transition. It wasn't designed to build wealth. It was designed to extract it. The Balkans became a laboratory for disaster capitalism, and the experiment succeeded beyond the architect's wildest dreams. Not for the people, for the predators. Let's talk about socially owned property. This was Yugoslavia's unique system. Factories didn't belong to the state like in the Soviet Union. They didn't belong to private owners like in the West. They belonged, theoretically, to society itself. Workers managed them through councils. They had usage rights but no clean ownership titles. When the country fractured and the wars ended, this created a legal black hole. Who actually owned these assets? Who had the right to sell them? The answer, it turned out, was whoever had the most political connections and the least conscience. Enter the privatization heist. This wasn't capitalism. This was organized theft with a legal stamp. The playbook was simple and devastatingly effective. First, devalue the target. Bring in a friendly auditor to assess a textile factory worth millions. Ignore the prime real estate it sits on. Mark the imported German machinery as obsolete scrap. Suddenly, a thriving enterprise is worth less than a suburban house. The valuation is a fiction, but it's an official fiction. Second, rig the auction. Publish the tender notice in an obscure regional newspaper. Set impossible deadlines. Require bizarre qualifications that only one company mysteriously possesses. When auction day arrives, only one bidder shows up. Always someone politically connected. A cousin, a former minister, a party financier. The competition is theater. The outcome was decided in backroom meetings months earlier. Third, finance the theft with public money. The buyer doesn't have cash, so a state-influenced bank provides a loan. The collateral is often the very factory being purchased. In any functioning financial system, this circular lending triggers fraud investigations. In the Balkans during the 2000s, it was standard operating procedure. Public funds financing private enrichment. The risk socialized. The profit privatized. Fourth, strip the carcass. Fire the workers immediately. Severance is minimal or non-finished. sell the machinery for scrap metal, copper wiring ripped from walls, steel beams hauled to recycling yards, warehouse inventory liquidated at pennies on the dollar, then rezone the land from industrial to commercial, flip it to developers for luxury apartments. The factory that employed 800 people for 40 years becomes a parking lot and a shopping mall within 18 months. This happened hundreds of times across Bosnia, Serbia, Macedonia, Kosovo. Entire industrial sectors vanished, not because they were uncompetitive, because they were more valuable dead than alive. The productive capacity was destroyed. The cash was extracted, and a new oligarch class was born from the corpse of the social economy. Let's talk about the human cost. Imagine you're 52 years old. You've worked at the Carver car factory since you were 19. You're a skilled machinist, middle class. You own an apartment. Your daughter is in university. Then one morning in 2004, you arrive at the factory gates. They're chained shut. A notice announces privatization. Within 6 months, you're dismissed. Your severance is 3,000 euros total. 30 years of labor bought off for grocery money. Nobody wants to hire a middle-aged machinist when there are no more machines to operate. You join the gray economy. You drive an unregistered taxi. You guard construction sites at night. You watch the men who dismantled your factory drive past in Mercedes SUVs. You learn the most corrosive lesson a society can teach. Hard work doesn't matter. Loyalty doesn't matter. Only connections matter. That psychological wound never heals. It metastasizes into cynicism, apathy, rage. An entire generation learned that the system is rigged. And they're not wrong. Now let's address the second disaster, the exodus. Economists obsess over GDP growth rates and foreign investment. They're looking at the wrong metric. The only number that truly matters is the census count. The Balkans are experiencing a demographic collapse so severe that some demographers describe it as depopulation by 1,000 departures. Not ethnic cleansing by war, ethnic cleansing by economics. People aren't being driven out. They're walking out, and they're not coming back. Bulgaria has lost roughly 2 million people since 1990. That's more than a quarter of its population. Bosnia is even more tragic. Nearly as many Bosnians live abroad as live inside the country. Entire towns exist primarily as Facebook groups and WhatsApp chats. The town square is empty, the schools are closing. But the digital diaspora is thriving in Stuttgart, Vienna, and Stockholm. Serbia loses tens of thousands annually. A medium-sized town disappears from the map every single year. And this isn't just villagers leaving. It's doctors, engineers, programmers, the educated elite. The future? Here's the cruelest irony. The Balkans spends taxpayer money educating doctors. It costs the Serbian state roughly 150,000 euros to train a physician from childhood through medical school. That money comes from VAT taxes paid by pensioners buying bread, from sales taxes on families scraping by on 400 euro salaries. The state invests everything into creating a skilled professional. Then the day after graduation, that doctor takes a German language exam and boards a plane to Munich. Germany gets a fully trained physician. Serbia gets nothing. It's a massive invisible wealth transfer from poor countries to rich ones. One of the largest quiet subsidies in modern Europe. Visit a Bosnian village in July and you'll see a strange phenomenon. Luxury CUVs with Swiss plates. massive villas with marble facades and ornate gates. These are the gastarbeiter houses, guest worker monuments, built with remittances from factory jobs in Germany and construction work in Norway. But here's the twist. Nobody lives in them. For 11 months a year, the shutters are closed. The driveways are empty. The villages are silent. Entire neighborhoods exist as empty monuments to departure, shrines to absence, and the psychological message is devastating. If you stayed behind, you failed. If you're still here, you're a loser. That belief becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Why build a future here when success is defined by leaving? The census has become politically radioactive. North Macedonia avoided holding one for nearly 2 decades. Why? Because ethnic population ratios determine political power and constitutional arrangements. In Bosnia, census results influence representation, budget allocations, institutional control. Everyone fears the same revelation, that the countries they're fighting over are becoming empty shells. That sovereignty over nothing is still nothing. Now let's talk about the third pillar of this disaster, the party-state system. In Western democracies, you join a political party because you agree with their tax policy or social platform. In the Balkans, you join a political party so you can eat. This is clientelism, and it's the engine that powers corruption. Political parties divide cities into microzones. A local captain controls your street. He knows you live in apartment 4B. He knows your son needs an internship. He knows your mother has been waiting 8 months for a surgery approval. He knocks on your door. "We can help," he says, "but we need loyalty." Loyalty doesn't just mean voting. It means attending rallies, bringing 10 friends. In the worst documented cases, it means photographing your ballot as proof, showing your marked paper to a party operative outside the polling station. This happens. Investigators have documented it. Journalists have filmed it. And the reward is pathetic. A temporary municipal contract. A monthly food package. Fast-tracked paperwork. You trade your political freedom for survival. And you do it because refusing means risking everything. There's a term for this across the region. Sandvikari, sandwich eaters. They're the people bused to political rallies, given a sandwich, bottled water, and transport. They wave flags for leaders they don't believe in. It sounds absurd. It isn't. Many are public sector workers who fear termination if they don't participate. Teachers pressured by principals. Hospital staff pressured by administrators. The rallies look like enthusiasm. They're actually coercion wrapped in spectacle. This system requires a constant supply of jobs to distribute as rewards, so the public sector expands endlessly. Bosnia operates with a 3-member presidency, roughly 14 parliaments and governments across different administrative layers, over 100 ministers, thousands of deputies, assistants, advisors, agencies. Each institution becomes a political feeding trough. If one party controls the telecommunications company, they pack it with cousins. If another party controls forestry, they pack it with nephews. Competence is irrelevant. Loyalty is everything. And the public sector becomes a jobs program for party members. How do they finance this machine? Public procurement. A city announces a €1 million road repair project. In a healthy system, companies compete on price and quality. In a captured system, the tender is written so narrowly that only one company qualifies. Must have exactly 14 trucks. 2 painted yellow. 10 years of experience on this specific street. Miraculously, the mayor's brother-in-law owns that company. He wins the contract for €1 million. He subcontracts the actual work for $400,000. The remaining $600,000 circulates through kickbacks, party financing, and patronage payments. It's a closed loop. Public money funds political power. Political power protects the theft. The cycle repeats infinitely. And if you refuse to play, inspections suddenly become very thorough. Your permits are delayed. Your business license is questioned. The tax authority discovers irregularities. You learn quickly. Compliance is survival. Resistance is bankruptcy. The system doesn't need to jail you. It just needs to strangle you economically until you submit. Now let's talk about construction. Walk through Belgrade's waterfront district or the upscale areas of Tirana. Cranes everywhere. Luxury towers rising. Penthouses selling for €500,000. Now look at the salary data. Average wages hover around €700 monthly. Mortgage rates are high. The population is shrinking. By basic economics, housing prices should be cooling. Instead, they're exploding. In parts of Belgrade, prices per square meter jump 30 to 40% in just a few years. So who is buying these apartments? That question leads us to the fourth disaster, the laundering economy. The Western Balkans sits on one of Europe's main cocaine transit routes. Organized crime networks move product from South American ports through Balkan corridors into Western European markets. That trade generates enormous volumes of dirty cash. Hundreds of millions, potentially billions. You can't deposit 10 million in unexplained cash without triggering alarms. But you can pour concrete. Construction is the perfect washing machine. Here's how it works. A shell company appears, registered offshore or through layered ownership structures, represented locally by a law firm. The investor is anonymous. The capital injection begins. Construction is financed through opaque channels, inflated invoices, related party subcontractors, partial cash payments, weak oversight. Illicit funds blend seamlessly into legal flows. Then apartments are sold, often to other shell entities, cash buyers, no mortgages, minimal ownership transparency. Finally, the property carries a legal deed. When resold later, taxes are paid. The money appears legitimate, clean, respectable, ready for investment elsewhere. The Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime has repeatedly flagged construction and real estate as major laundering vectors in the region. The warnings are ignored. Why? Because this dirty money keeps the economy liquid. It funds consumption. It employs construction workers. It generates VAT revenue. Governments publicly condemn organized crime. Privately, they depend on the cash flow it generates. It's a Faustian bargain. Economic stability purchased with blood money. The most visible symbol is Belgrade waterfront, a multi-billion euro development backed by UA-linked investors, transforming old rail yards into a Dubai-style skyline. To enable it, Serbia passed a special law overriding planning regulations and property protections. Then came the night of April 24, 2016. Masked men arrived with excavators in the Savamala district. They detained civilians, confiscated phones, demolished buildings illegally. Citizens called police. Police did not respond. Later investigations confirmed emergency services were instructed not to intervene. In a European capital, an entire block was destroyed while institutions stood down. It exposed where real power lives. Not in Parliament, in the shadows behind the cranes. This laundering economy distorts everything. Rents surge. Ownership becomes unreachable for ordinary families. Adults remain with parents into their late 30s. Cities hollow out socially even as skylines grow. It's urban development for people who don't live there, funded by money that shouldn't exist, and the cycle continues because nobody with power has an incentive to stop it. Now let's address the elephant in Brussels. You might ask why the European Union tolerates this corruption. These countries want EU membership. They receive billions in development aid. Why doesn't Brussels stop the rot? The uncomfortable answer is that the EU often enables it. Political scientists call this stabilitocracy, a model where authoritarian-leaning governments are tolerated because they deliver geopolitical stability. The unspoken deal is simple. The West signals we won't press too hard on media freedom, judicial independence, or electoral irregularities. In exchange, leaders deliver two things. No war. Keep ethnic tensions controlled. No migrant surges. Act as a buffer zone for refugee flows toward Europe. As long as stability is maintained, democratic backsliding is tolerated. Slovenia joined the EU in 2004, Croatia in 2013. Since then, enlargement momentum stalled. North Macedonia changed its constitutional name to resolve a dispute with Greece. Negotiations were still blocked, first by France over reform concerns, then by Bulgaria over language and historical issues. The message to citizens became clear. No matter what reforms are implemented, membership remains distant, a perpetual carrot dangled just out of reach. Balkan leaders learned to exploit this hesitation. When criticized by Brussels, they court Moscow or Beijing. They sign infrastructure deals, purchase equipment, highlight alternative partnerships. The implicit message is leverage. If you pressure us too hard, we have other friends. And the EU blinks. Every time, because instability in the Balkans means refugee crises and security threats. So they tolerate corruption in exchange for containment. It's cynical, it's effective, and it traps the region in permanent limbo. On paper, reforms look impressive. Anti-corruption agencies exist. Judicial frameworks are modern. Laws align with EU standards. In practice, institutions remain captured. Appointments are partisan. Enforcement is selective. The facade is European. The structure behind it is deeply compromised. It's what activists call pumpkin rule of law. It looks ripe on the outside, hollow on the inside. Now let's talk about foreign investment. Governments announce record FDI inflows, major manufacturers arriving, thousands of jobs promised. Look closer. What kind of investment is actually arriving? The Western Balkans branded itself as Europe's cheap labor workshop. The pitch to investors is brutal. Wages are low. Workers are desperate. Regulations are flexible and will pay you to hire them. These subsidies often range between 5,000 and 15,000 euros per worker. Do the math. If a worker earns 400 euros monthly, a 10,000 euro subsidy offsets wages for nearly 2 years. The investor's risk is minimal. The public absorbs the cost. The worker remains poor. This model produces low-skill assembly work. We're not designing engines or writing software. We're twisting cables. Copper arrives from Germany. Plastic from Asia. Workers assemble components. The finished product goes back to Western Europe. The value stays abroad. The wages stay minimal. It's not industrial development. It's subsidized labor arbitrage. The Balkans supplies biological input, human labor. The profit margin flows elsewhere. It resembles modern dependency economics. Not classic colonialism, but not convergence either. Labor protections are weakly enforced to keep investors satisfied. Reports from foreign-owned factories described extreme conditions, workers discouraged from bathroom breaks, pressured to meet quotas at any cost. Companies denied the claims, but the perception revealed something deeper: vulnerability. When subsidies expire, investors often leave. The Italian shoemaker Geox did exactly that. After years of state support, the factory closed. Over 1,000 workers, mostly women, lost their jobs overnight. The investor exited. The town absorbed the damage. This isn't partnership, it's extraction. Then China arrived. As the EU began pressing on corruption and environmental rules, Balkan leaders found a lender with fewer questions. Beijing saw the region as a gateway into Europe. Leaders saw easy money. Montenegro's Bar-Bolier Highway became the symbol. A country with a GDP just over $5 billion took a nearly $1 billion Chinese loan. Only 41 kilometers were built. Debt exploded. Environmental damage followed. Investigations stalled. In Serbia, Chinese-linked firms preserved mining jobs, but at the cost of pollution and falling standards. This is the trade-off. Jobs now, costs later. So why no revolt? 2 safety valves. The gray economy keeps people afloat, and remittances up to 15% of GDP pay the bills. Emigration exports anger. Youth leave. Money returns. Pressure fades. The system survives by staying broken, always reforming, never arriving. A region stuck in limbo, stable enough to endure, too captured to heal.